Okay, so first of all, just welcome. I'm glad you guys could make it, and I really want this to be a review where you are getting your questions answered, and you feel like that it's something that is going to help you for the exam. That is the whole idea of this. Since we don't get to meet in person, this kind of gets, this is the way that I can kind of help you with any questions you have, and then just go over some things that maybe you might be struggling with, or maybe not. Maybe as we go through them, you'll be like, yeah, I totally, get that. So that's really good. Okay. All right. Oh, I didn't put that in the chat. I'll just put that file in the chat so everybody will have it. Okay. All right. But let's talk about a few things here. There are definitely some formulas that you need to make sure that you have memorized for the exam. And a lot of those have to do with the equations of lines, for sure, right? There were like things that you had to figure out, like with slope and, the slope-intercept form and point slope formula and those kind of things. So, and we will be going through some of those as well. But, so those are kind of like the formulas that you need to have memorized for this exam. But of course, there's, other things that you need to make sure that you know how to do, and we'll kind of go through those as we're headed, through this. So, well, let's just get started into this then. And I just want to, make sure, first of all, so number one, right? I just want to make sure that you know how to graph lines. So when you're graphing a line, remember that there's a lot of different ways that you can do it. You can make a little, table of values if you want. Let's see what's going on here.
That is the easiest way.
What's that?
The easiest way, I said.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh.
yeah, I don't think this is the easiest way. What were you going to say? Do you think is easier?
Yeah, for me it's easier.
Okay, so you can definitely like pick x's and figure out what y's are, or you can look at your equation, all right, like we have, like let's look at this one here. Y equals 3/4 x minus 1. Well, this -1 is your y-intercept, and that's where you can start. That's like your y-intercept means like your starting point. And then from there, this is your slope. And so that, and remember, slope is rise over run. So this is, since it's a +3, we're going to go up 3 and right 4. So, so that's the way that I usually like to do it, but there's so many different ways. You can also, solve it by intercepts and stuff, and we'll do one of those down here. So on this one, let's just look at it, and I'm just going to show you here. So if I was graphing this line, I would start at -1 on my y-axis, and then from there I'd go up 3, so 1, 2, 3, and then over 4, which is there. This is kind of small on this page, and then you can just draw your line through that. Okay, and so that's a way that you can do it. But like I said, you could have chosen some points too. And if you're going to choose some, make some points, I would say choose ones like, -1, 0, and 1, unless you have a fraction, right? If you have a fraction like this 3/4 x, and you choose this -1 or 1, that's going to give you some fractions to graph. And so that's a little bit harder. But if you choose multiples of 4, that would actually make the easier. So instead on this one, I would choose -4, 0, and 4. And then those would come out to be whole number answers. And those would be a little bit easier to graph. And on the homework, it makes you, like use like whole numbers and stuff. But on the test, you don't have to. Like if you came up with fractions, you could estimate it. I'm just fine with that. Just as long as you know some way to graph it, is what I'm worried about there. Okay, so let's look at number 2 now. And on this one, it's asking us to find the domain, right? And so does anybody remember, like when we have a fraction like this, notice we have a fraction, right? There's certain values, right, that we can't, or a value on this one that we can't use, otherwise it's going to make this undefined. Does anybody remember? How do we do that? How do we figure out what?
Yeah, we have to look to the denominator.
Okay.
The denominator must not equal 0.
Right. So you don't care about whatever's on top. Like we don't care about 7 at all. We're just going to take whatever's on the denominator, 6 minus x, and say it cannot equal 0. Now, in some of the videos, they probably, said put it equal to 0 or whatever, and in the end, that's what it's not. But I like to have this there already, so it's very clear, like this is what it can't be. Right? And then we want to go and solve for x. So I'm going to get x by itself, so I'll subtract the 6 over. So I get negative x equals negative 6, and if I divide by negative 1, then I get x, whoops, and I should put cannot there, x cannot equal positive 6, right? And that's because that's going to make this 0, right? 6 minus 6 is 0, and I can't divide by 0. And so that's the only number that it can't be, right? And so if it asks for an excluded value, that's what this would be. You just write it as x equals 6. But here, notice, and you got to watch the directions really carefully. This one says find the domain. So this is saying what it can't be, but what it's asking here is what can it be? So does anybody have an idea of how we write that, of what it can be?
It's all a number except 6.
So how do...
I was going to say...
So in interval notation, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Negative infinity, less than 6, less than infinity.
Okay, so let's put our little brackets and parentheses and stuff on it.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah.
So we'd have...
so you can do the parenthesis, negative infinity, comma 6, parenthesis, union, parenthesis, and then 6 comma infinity.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you're right. Yeah, exactly like that. Because if we were thinking on a number line, right, when we're saying x cannot equal 0, if this is 6, then this open circle right there is what it can't be. But it can be anything smaller than it, and it can be anything bigger than it, just not 6. And so if it asks you on the test to write it, give the domain, you'll write it this way. But if it just says to find the excluded value, then you can just write it this way. Okay, so just understanding how it wants the answer to be reported, on there is always a good thing. So watch the watch the directions really carefully on this, because there are going to be specific things, that I'm going to ask you to write it. Like this needs to be an interval notation too. So make sure you understand how to do that. Okay, questions on?
Yeah, what about Spelder notation? How we can write it for this question?
The other notation, set builder?
Yeah, Spelder notation.
Yeah, so we don't use that one that much in this class, and that's just because 1050 is the class that most of you are going to take after this, and they've just said that they want to make sure that students are really ready, and understand interval notation. But set builder would be written like this. You'd write a little squiggly bracket there, and then x such that, so a straight line up and down in math means such that x cannot equal 6.
Okay, yeah.
So that would be the other way to write it. Okay, but if it asks it on the exam, it's going to ask it in the interval notation, just to make sure you're clear. I mean, and if you write it this way, you know, instead, like you'll probably miss, you know, one of the like 5 points or whatever, because I can tell you know how to do it, but you just didn't follow that, you know, part of the of the directions. Any other questions on that? All right. Okay, how about this one? So this one says, find the intercepts and then graph the function. So notice that this equation is what we call standard form. And standard form just means that the x and the y are on the same side of the equation, of the equal sign, and then there's just a number with no variable on the other side. So it's written in standard form right now. And when it's written in standard form, it's a little bit easier to find the intercepts, right? So it's asking me to find an x-intercept and a y-intercept. And again, on the test, it will even be a little bit more specific than this, and it'll say to write them as an ordered pair. Okay, and that just means a point. Because the one thing that I find is when people, you know, solve for these, the x and the y's, you know, they're looking at it and they're going, okay, x is this, but they're not really thinking, oh, that's a point on the graph. And so I want you to write it as a point. That's going to help you to graph it easier. All right, so when I do this, I do like to make a little table of values. All right, and so I'm going to, you know, say when y equals 0, I'll solve for x, and that's going to give me my x-intercept. And then if I let x be 0 and solve for y, that's going to give me my y-intercept. Right? Is that clear so far to that point? Any questions about that? Okay, so when we put y, or when we put 0 in place of y into this equation there, I'll put kind of some work down here. So I'll have 3x plus 2 times 0, because I'm saying I'm going to let 0 go in place of y, equals negative 18. So that term, you know, 0 times anything is just 0, so that's gone. So really all I'm doing here to solve for x is to divide by 3. So I get x equals negative 6. Okay, so how do I write that? So this is my x-intercept, but how do I write that as an ordered pair?
Negative 6, 0.
Yeah, negative 6, 0, right? Because that's what I just found here, was when y was 0, I'm solving for x. So that gives me a point on the graph. All right, so over negative 6, up 0 is about there, we'll say. Okay, now let's do the other one, find the y-intercept. So this time we're going to put 0 in place of x. So I've got 3 times 0 plus 2y equals negative 18. Again, this term just goes away because 0 times anything is just 0. And so I'm really dividing both sides by 2. So y equals negative 9. So how would I write that as an ordered pair?
0, negative 9.
Negative 9.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, and so that's kind of what I'm looking for there. And then if I can see, let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, looks like about there. It's kind of hard to see on my screen. It probably is on yours too. It's kind of, these are really too little to put on here, but then we will, you know, just make a line, it goes through both of those points. Okay. All right, questions on that? So make sure you know how to solve something, when it's in this other form that we talked about up here, when it's in that slope-intercept form, but also make sure you know how to graph a line if it's in standard form. Okay, so you definitely need to know how to do both of those. Yeah, was there a question?
Yeah, so when it's written in this form, you don't need to make it into the y equals form?
You don't have to. You can. You can. I mean, it would, but sometimes when you take it from standard form and put it into slope intercept form, you might get some like weird fractions and stuff. On this one, you wouldn't, but on some of them you do. And so that's why when it's in this form, just finding the X and Y intercept tends to be the easier way to graph it. But you can, you totally can change it to the other form and graph it that way. That will totally work. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Other questions? Okay. Please speak up. Remember, if you have a question, somebody else in the class also has that same question. I am sure of it. So, okay. So we've talked a little bit about some of these. Already, but let's define these. Okay, so what's kind of, what's a formula for slope intercept form of a line? Let's have somebody that hasn't answered yet just go ahead and tell us. And some of you are putting stuff in the chat, and that's great because I understand some of you might not be able to unmute and talk. Somebody unmute yourself, though, that hasn't said anything yet. Tell us.
Sure, it's y equals mx plus b.
Awesome. Okay, where m is what?
The slope.
The slope.
And b is?
The y-intercept.
The y-intercept. Awesome. Okay, can somebody else tell me how to find the slope of a line? So what's the slope formula?
Y minus y1.
So I'm going to put m here because we call that slope. So on the top, y minus, or y, sorry, we got to have a y1 and a y2 or something. And it doesn't matter which way you write that, but usually I think the book has it as like y2 minus y1, don't they? Okay, and then over what?
X2, X1.
Yeah.
Minus X1.
Yep, x2 minus x1. So the most common mistake I see when it asks to find the slope is people accidentally put the x's on top and the y's on the bottom. The y always needs to go on top on this, okay? So make sure you do that. And then I'll put this one over here where you can see it a little bit better. Okay, so so somebody else that hasn't said anything yet, okay? How do we, or what is the point slope formula?
Y minus y1. For sure. Equal to m parentheses x minus x1.
Perfect. Okay, just like that. And so you will always use, so when it asks you to write an equation of a line, that's when you want to use this. So I'm going to just kind of, put that over here, right? An equation. Because sometimes people get confused, like how to do that. And there are other ways, like you can use this top one here, but I think the book mostly uses showing this way. So if you've learned it another way in another class using the slope intercept form, I'm totally fine with that. Or if there were some videos where it did that, that's great. As long as you know, one way to do it. But I'd say, pick a way and stick with it. Otherwise it gets confusing and you might like make, some mistakes if you're doing that. Okay. Was there a question? Can't tell. All right. Tell if anybody is asking me a question or not, but speak up if you are. Okay, so now we're going to use some of these formulas to help us find, what we do here. So the first one, all right, after this, so number 4, find an equation in slope-intercept form of the line containing these 2 points. All right. So when I am trying to find the equation of a line, right, look at, I have to use this equation right here in blue. And so notice that, you know, I need to know the slope, that's my m, and I need to know 1 point, right, an x1, y1. And so I'm given a point, right, and it doesn't matter which one I call x1, y1 and x2, y2. Okay, so don't get hung up about that. It, you know, it could be either way. It's not going to change your answer. So I'm given a point, but I'm not given the slope. But I can find it, right? How do I go about finding the slope if I'm given 2 points?
Use the slope of a line m equal y2 minus y1.
Yeah, so this slope formula right there in black, right? So let's use that. So we have, so we got to do this first. So m equals, so what's my y2?
4
Minus
8
yep, over
1 minus 3.
Perfect. Okay, now let's simplify this. We get -4 over
-2.
-2, which simplifies to be
2.
2. Okay, so 2 is my slope. So now I know my slope and I know a point. All right, so you see I can use this and this to now write that equation of a line. Okay, so let's go ahead and use this blue formula here now to do that. So this y and x, and this is where some people get confused in this formula, this y and x stay as y and x. We have to have variables to make it an equation. We can't put all numbers in there, otherwise it's not an equation. So we don't put anything in this for the y and the x, right? But when I write this out, I've got y minus y1, which is, in this case, 8. So y minus 8 equals what?
Equal slope is 2. And x minus x1 is 3.
Yeah. Okay, now you could have used either point, but don't accidentally like use y from one and x from the other, because that's going to get you to the wrong place. But you can use either point for it if one of the points looks easier than the other. Okay, and then it wants the answer in slope-intercept form. So let's go ahead and simplify this. We'll distribute that 2 through. Y minus 8 equals 2x minus 6. And then the last thing I need to do is add 8 over. So y equals 2x plus 2. And that would be my answer. Oops, maybe I won't put that on there. No, it's all right. Okay, questions on that one? So if you're given 2 points, you got to find the slope first and then use the point slope formula.
So can we do it with different way? Like choose the slope and instead of use point slope form, use y equal mx plus b and substitute one of these point and the slope, find v, then we rewrite it again.
Yep, you can do it that way. So if this is the way that you've thought about, you know, that you've been working on doing it, then do it that same way. Like, I don't want you to, like, if you've been practicing one way, like, do it that way. So let me show you this way, just in case some of you are more familiar with this, right? So this one, we've got to put numbers in place of our y, our x, and our slope, and we're trying to find our y-intercept. All right, so if I do that, I'm just going to choose this same point here, that 3, 8. So I'll have 8 equals 2 is my slope, times 3, all right, is my x, and then plus b. So I get 8 equals 6 plus b, and when I subtract the 6 over, I get that b equals 2. Right? But that's not my answer. Sometimes students stop there, right? That's your y-intercept, and now you've got to get it into that slope-intercept form. So we've got to put 2 in place of our slope. So y equals 2 times x, and then plus our y-intercept is 2. All right, so either way you get the same answer. So, and I don't care which way you do it on the test. You pick which way works best for your brain. That's what I always, always, always want you to do, right? Just because like something works better for my brain one way doesn't mean it's going to work better for your brain that way. And I'm fine with either as long as you're showing your work or explaining how you're getting there. That's great, okay? All right. Well, let's look at number 5, unless I don't see any questions. If you do have questions, you know, and you want to like kind of pause me, you know, if we don't want to go on, like raise your hand in the reactions or just speak up, just unmute and speak. All right, so number 5, write an equation of a line parallel to this line and through this point. All right, so this time they're not giving us 2 points, they're giving us an equation and a point. But again, remember, to write an equation, we need to know the slope and we need to know a point if we're going to use this point-slope formula. Okay, or if we do it this way, we need to know a point and we need to know the slope there, right? So either way, we need to know those things. Okay, so what do I need to do to this equation first, though, so I can find the slope?
Put it in the slope.
Turn it to slope-intercept form.
Yeah, I think both of you are saying the same thing. Change it to slope-intercept form. So when it's in this form, I cannot tell what the slope is, right? I've got to solve it for y. So let me put that over here. So I've got x minus 2y equals 3. I'm going to get y by itself, so I'm going to start by subtracting the x over. So I've got negative 2y equals negative x plus 3, and then divide everything by negative 2. So that's going to give me y equals, now negative divided by a negative is a positive, so I've got 1/2 x, and then minus, so I've got a positive divided by a negative, minus 3/2. Okay, and then again, the only part that I want from this, the reason why it gives me that, is so I can find the slope. And remember, my slope, once it's in y-intercept form, is that number in front of the x. Okay, now the x isn't part of the slope, it's just the number in front of it is our slope. Okay, so we don't even need this y-intercept on this equation. That's not going to do anything for us. But now we know this point over here too, right? So I've got this is my x1 and my y1. And so now I can use either method that you want, you know, to figure out what the equation of the line is. So why don't you guys try that? Let me give you just a couple of minutes. You choose whether you're going to use the point slope form or the y equals mx plus b form and figure out, and oh, notice that it says parallel. And so that means it's the same slope. So it is going to be 1/2. Okay, we'll do the next one is when it's perpendicular. We'll talk about that. Okay, go ahead and let me give you just a couple minutes to do that. Okay, when you get an answer, go ahead and put that answer in the chat. And you can just send it to me as a direct message, or you can just put it in there like it is. Okay, it's looking good. You guys are doing great with it. Okay, I'm going to show this way with the point slope, but like I said, you could do it the other way and you should get the exact same answer. Okay, so if I put my point and my slope into this, I get y minus 5 equals m, which is my 1/2, times x minus 2. Okay, now be really careful on this. I guess we'll kind of see it down here. When these are negative numbers, when you're minusing a negative, be really careful with that. That tends to be a place where people accidentally write it as minus instead of when you're minusing a negative, it's really plus, okay? All right, so if we distribute that through, I've got y minus 5 equals 1/2 x, and then 1/2 times negative 2 is negative 1, and then I just need to add the 5 over. Okay, and so that gives me y equals 1/2 x plus 4. Let me see, it's kind of hard to read there. Let me move it over here. Okay, and so that would be your answer. And like I said, either way you do it. I don't care which way you do this, but make sure you know one of those two ways to do that. Questions on that one? Look like most of you were able to come up with that. So that's awesome. Okay, now this one's similar, but now it's line perpendicular to, right? So what do we need to remember about perpendicular lines?
The slope is going to be the opposite reciprocal
Yeah.
of the original
The
one.
slope is inverse.
Yeah, so yeah, to be really, precise, they are the opposite reciprocal, right? So opposite meaning you got to change the sign, and reciprocal means you need to flip it, all right? So you got to do both things.